Hi loves! Welcome back to another sewing tutorial. Today we are making this gorgeous jumpsuit. It's elegant, comfortable, and it's giving boss lady vibe. This jumpsuit is perfect for any occasion. I will guide you through every step from cutting to finishing so you can make and rock yours with pride. Before we start this tutorial, special appreciation to Sue Vector. Pardon me if I did not pronounce the name correctly. She requested for this tutorial and inspired it. Thank you so much for your support, ma'am. Now, let's dive into the tutorial. This is the fabric that I'm using for the project. It is 4 yards of thick crepe. We are going to draft the pants first before we draft the bodice and the jacket. You can draft your pants directly on the fabric, or you can create pattern for the pants. As you can see, I was drafting my pants pattern on my pattern paper before I decided to draft directly on the fabric. I'm going to be drafting directly on the fabric. I have folded the fabric into two. I have marked down 1 inch from the top of my fabric, just 1 inch margin, okay, as the starting point. And then for the measurements that we are using for the project, this is the measurements: the bust of 36, waist of 29, hip of 40, bust point of 10 inches, bust span of 7.5, front half length, that is shoulder to waist line, of 16, then the back half length is 15, trouser length of 44. So my trouser length is 44 inches plus 2 inches hemming allowance, okay? Then thigh measurement of 24. To get your thigh measurement, wrap your tape around the highest point of your thigh. That is the thigh measurement. Waist to knee length, okay? I'll go ahead now and mark the waist to knee length. If you don't know how to take trouser measurement, tell me in the comment section and I will send you a detailed tutorial. What we are going to be doing now is to mark down the waist to hip line, okay? So for mine, I have 8.5 as my waist to hip line. I'm going to mark waist to crotch line. So what I'm going to do now is to come to the hip line and mark the hip measurements, okay? I have hip circumference of 40. I'll divide it by 4 plus 1 inch allowance, okay? You can add up to 1.5 inches allowance. But for mine, I just want 1 inch allowance. That means I have half inch for the joining of the crotch curve and then half inch for the side, okay? So I'll go ahead and mark my hip plus 1 inch allowance at my hip line, and I will also mark it at my waist line, okay, and then at the crotch line. Now connect all the 3 points. The next measurement I'm going to mark now is the thigh measurement. I have thigh measurement of 24, okay, so I'm going to be adding 2 inches to the thigh measurement. I have 24 plus 2 divided by 2. That means I have 26 inches divided by 2 will give me 13 inches, okay? This is a standard to get the thigh measurements. So I'm going to come under the crotch line and mark 13 inches. And what I'm going to do next is to divide that 13 by 2 so that I can find the middle point of my thigh line, okay? I will take it down to the hem line, all right? I'll come to the knee line and mark down that 13 inches as well. And I'll come to the hem line and mark the same 13 inches, okay? So what I'm going to do now is to come to the round knee measurement and mark in half inch. I don't want it to be very free. I want it to have a little shape on my knee. So I'll come to the knee and mark down half inch inward, okay? And then connect to the thigh measurements. If you want the pant fitted around your knee, you can mark down your round knee measurements. So what I'm going to do now is to blend this measurement to the full length, like so. If you want, you can still take this half inch in to the hemline, okay? I don't want to take it down to the hemline. You can do whatever you want. If you still want the down part to be tight, you can make it tight, okay? You can come in more. If you want to take like 6 inches on both sides, you can take 6 inches on both sides. If you want to take more than that, you can do whatever you want. Okay, so we are done with the down part. I'm going to come to the crotch line now, and then I'll come to that point and take 0.5. I want 0.5 because I want the crotch curve to be very deep. Okay, then I'll create the crotch curve. Come to the waistline and then mark the dart. Okay, I'll be taking off 1/2 inch that I'll use to join the crotch curve. So this is the 1/2 inch that I will use to join the crotch curve. Then I'll mark down my nipple to nipple width. That is the bust span measurement. Okay, mine is 7.5. I'm going to divide 7.5 by 2, which is 3.75. So I'll mark 3.75 on the waistline as well as on the hip line. Okay, I am marking from that 1/2 inch that I have marked out for the joining of the crotch. So I'll connect the dart line. Then on each side of the dart line, I'm going to mark 1/2 inch, okay, as the dart intake. Then I'll connect to 1 inch above the hip line. You can notice that I have not marked my waist measurement. So I'll come to the waistline and divide my waist circumference by 4. Okay, my waist is 29. When I divide by 4, I have 7.25. I'm going to be marking from this side, okay, from the crotch curve side. Okay, so I'll mark 7.25. Then I'm going to replace this dart intake, which is 1 inch. So I'll go ahead and replace it, and I'll also add joining seam allowance here and joining seam allowance for the side. I think 1 inch is okay for mine, so I'll go ahead and mark that 1 inch, and I'll connect to the hip line. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to come to the waistline and add 1/2 inch joining seam allowance to the jumpsuit. Okay, why I like drafting my pants on the pattern paper is because I like closing up my waist dart. If I had drafted this pants on my pattern paper, I would have loved to close up the dart so that I do not have to sew the dart on my fabric. But since I have cut directly on my fabric, I'm going to be sewing the darts down. So I'll go ahead and cut out the pattern. Before I'll cut the waistline, I'm going to close up the dart as if I closed up the dart. Then I'll cut. We are going to go ahead now and cut out the back pant leg. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and extend the crotch line, extend the knee line, as well as the full length and the hemming allowance. Then I'll come to the inseam area and add 3.5, okay, for the back crotch extension. Then I'll also extend this line. I'll come to the crotch curve here and mark 1.5 for the back crotch curve, because the back crotch curve is not supposed to be as deep as the front crotch curve. Okay, then I'll come to the waistline and raise the back crotch curve up by 0.75. Okay, and then I'll connect all the points like so. So from here I'll connect to the waistline. Then I'm going to go ahead and cut out the pattern. I will come to the back crotch curve and take out 0.75, okay, so that my zipper can lay flat at the back. Then I'll connect to the hip line. So I'll also indicate the dart for the back. I'm going to keep the pants leg aside so that we can cut out the bodice. Okay, I have already drafted my basic bodice block. You can draft directly on your fabric or you can draft on pattern paper. I like drafting on pattern paper because I love to close up my darts. I don't like having my darts on my fabric. If you're drafting directly on your fabric, you will have to sew the darts down. Okay, If you do not know how to draft a basic bodice block, just tell me in the comment section. I will send you a detailed tutorial on how to draft these whole lines here. So I'm going to go ahead now and mark my bust circumference divided by 4. Okay, my bust is 36. When I divide by 4, I have 9. Then I'll come to the waistline and mark my waist circumference divided by 4. I'll measure the dart intake 1.5 and replace it. Then I'll connect. I will also mark my bust circumference divided by 4. And at the waistline, I'll mark the waist circumference divided by 4 plus the 1.5 dart intake. Then I'll connect the point. You can notice that the front half length and the back half length are not equal. So to make them equal by the side, I'm going to be introducing side darts. So mine is 1 inch. The difference between my back half length and my front half length is 1 inch. The front half length is 16, while the back half length is 15. So I'll come under the bust point line and mark the 1 inch. Okay, and connect to the bust point line. So this is what I have. By the time I close up this dart by the side, the lengths are going to be the same. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is to create the V neckline that I want. I'll come to the neck and mark out ½ inch from my basic neckline. Okay, and then a depth of 7.5. If you want, you can make it come down more, or you go up as much as you want. Then I'll create the V neckline. Okay, I'll come to the back and also mark out ½ inch width from the basic neckline and connect to the 1 inch. Okay, I want to maintain the basic neck depth. I'm going to go ahead now and cut out the pattern. I would like to close up the darts first. I want to also close up the side dart. Close up the dart for the back. So now I have my front pattern and the back pattern. You can see that the lengths are equal by the side now. So I'm going to place on my fabric and add allowance and cut. While placing the pattern on your fabric, make sure that the front block is on fold and then go ahead and pin all the edges. So I'm going to go ahead now and add allowances. So I'll come to the waistline and draw out the waistline as well as the chest line. Then I'll come to the shoulder and also draw out the shoulder line. Okay, so I'll come to the side and add 1.5 side seam allowance. Then I'll come to the armhole and add ½ inch joining seam allowance at the armhole. I'll come to the shoulder line and mark ½ inch joining seam allowance, ½ inch for the neckline. And I'll come to the waistline and mark down ½ inch joining seam allowance. I'll go ahead now and add allowance to the back as well and cut out. .75 for the zipper allowance. So this is what I have. We are going to be cutting the jacket next. Okay, so for the jacket, I have already marked down my shoulder line, the chest line, the bust point line for the front, the waist line for the front, and the blouse length. Okay, for the back, I also marked down the chest line, the waist line, and the blouse length. You can see that the back blouse length is 1 inch shorter than the front blouse length because my front half length is 1 inch longer than the back half length. That is why the back length is 1 inch shorter than the front length. Okay, you can decide to make your jacket equal length if you are not adding waist and bust that. Okay, I want my own jacket fitted with that is why I have the front length longer than the back length by 1 inch. Having that on this jacket is optional. Whether you have that on the jacket or not, you will still have a very good fit. So this is the dart line. That is the bust span measurement divided by 2. Okay, and I have to mark 0.75 on each side of the dart line. Okay, and I connected to the chest line as well as 1 inch up above the hip line. All right, because the blouse length is also at my hip line. If you want yours to be longer, you can make yours longer, but this is the hip line. Okay, so I used my hip line as the blouse length. All right, so I also had to take off 0.75 at the back for the zipper. Okay, and then this is the basic neckline of 3 inches by 1 inch. All right, then the shoulder slope and the armhole curve. So we are going to focus on the front. On the pattern paper, I'll come to the front and mark down 3.5 for the lapel, for the jacket lapel. So you can mark more than 3.5 if you want yours to be bolder. Okay, so I think 3.5 is okay for my size. All right, you can mark 4 if you want to have up to 4 inches boldness here. So from that line, I'm going to start marking my measurement. I'll mark the shoulder width divided by 2 from this line. Okay, then I'll create my armhole. Also mark down my bust span measurement divided by 2. I am taking all my measurements from this line. Okay, then on the waistline, I'm going to take 0.75 on each side of the that line, just like I have done for the back. Okay, then I'll connect to the bust point and I'll come up by 1 inch on the hip line and connect the dart to that 1 inch. Okay, I have my waist dart here now, so I'm going to go ahead now and mark my bust circumference divided by 4. Then I'll come on the waistline and mark my waist circumference divided by 4. Now I'm going to measure this dart intake and replace it, and I'll come to the hip line and mark my hip circumference divided by 4. I'll come under the bust point line and mark the side dart, okay, and connect to the bust point. I'll come to the back and mark my bust circumference divided by 4. All right, then at the waistline, I'll mark my waist circumference divided by 4, and I'll replace the dart intake. Okay, then at the hip line, I'll mark the hip circumference divided by 4. I will connect all the points. Having that on this jacket is not compulsory. What do I mean? I mean that it is optional to have waist dart and bust dart on your jacket. If you don't want to put that on your jacket, you can go ahead and draft your jacket without that. In that way, the front length and the back length should be equal. I had to put that on mine because I want the jacket to be fitted on my body. If you don't want your jacket to be fitted on your body, then there's no need adding that. So the next thing we are going to do now is to convert the neckline to the lapel. So I'll come here and join paper. I'll come to the neckline and come out by 0.75. Remember, on the basic bodice block, we came out by ½ inch. At the back neckline, I'll also mark 0.75 and connect to the neck depth because I want to maintain the same neck depth. Now I'm going to measure what I have at the shoulder from the neck depth to the shoulder. Okay, I have 3.5, so I'm going to extend the neck up by 3.5. Okay, so I'm going to extend the neck up by 3.5 here. All right, and from there I'll also mark 3.5 here. So I'm going to carefully connect. I want to have curve at the side of my blouse by 1.5, so I'll create a soft curve here. This is optional. You can make it straight if you want it straight. So I'm going to go ahead now and cut out the pattern. I'm going to fold in the lapel from the waistline, like so. Then I'll go ahead and trim off the shoulder. So this is the armhole line for the front. I'm going to also trim it out a little because I don't want it to get into my armhole. Okay. So this is what I have. I'll turn to the front. So I'm going to be marking out extra half inch because I don't want this to get into the armhole. All right, at all. Now I'm going to blend into the lapel. So this is what I have as the jacket. All right. I'll place on my fabric now and add allowances. I'm going to be cutting 2 pieces of this and also 2 pieces of this, okay? As you can see now, I have placed my pattern on the fabric and I added all the necessary allowances. I added half-inch joining seam allowance at the shoulder line here, half-inch at the armhole, half-inch here, and then half-inch at the hemline. And I added 1.5 side seam allowance. You can add more or less, okay? And for the back, I added half-inch at the armhole, at the shoulder, and at the neckline. Then at the zipper area, I added 0.75 zipper allowance. When I got to the waistline, I stopped and I added just 0.25 here. All right, because my zipper is going to stop here for the jacket, okay? My zipper will not extend to the blouse length of the jacket. And then I added 0.5 here too as joining seam allowance. For the side, I added 1.5 just like I have done for the front, okay? I went ahead to also trace out all the darts. Can you see? I had to trace out my dart because I'm going to be sewing my darts down. I have to just draw out the dart lines, okay, so that it will appear on my fabric. I will carefully use the tailor's chalk to trace down the darts onto the fabric. If you know the best method to use to make your darts appear on the fabric, you can go ahead and use the method. So what I'm going to do is to come here and mark 0.75. So I'm going to come down by half-inch on the waistline and then connect like so. Please, if you want it curvy, you can make it curvy. I want mine straight. That is why I'm making mine straight. So I'm going to go ahead now and cut out the pattern. So you can see what I have now. I have 2 pieces for each, okay? That means I'm going to be using one as lining. So now we have the jacket pattern ready. The next thing we are going to be doing is to start sewing the jumpsuit, okay? If you want to see the sewing tutorial, then hit on that subscribe button if you have not subscribed. Turn on your notification bell so that once I upload the sewing tutorial, you will be notified. Or you can simply tell me in the comment section to send you the sewing tutorial and I will do that once I upload it. See you there.